of the Irish Centre for Diversity, and we have Peter Brabazon, the CEO of Specialisterne Ireland as well. I'll introduce you to them in more depth as we move forward, but for now, I'll just set us up for this call. So you're all very welcome. This is our agenda for today. So we're going to talk a little bit about why diversity and inclusion is good for business. So we all know that while diversity and inclusion is really good on a moral and a societal level, that we're always asked to make the business case for why to invest in it and why it needs to be a strategic priority. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to look at what gets in the way of hiring for diversity and inclusion. And we're actually going to talk a little bit about some of the tweaks you can do straight away after this call that can make your diversity and inclusion hiring process more effective. We're then going to talk about why diversity, equity and inclusion are critical components of HR planning for 2021. And that's with Salute Chowdhury, CEO of the Irish Centre for Diversity. We're then going to look at why neurodiversity is a valuable skill in the workplace with Peter Brabazon, CEO of Specialisterne. The latest employment outlook overview for Q3 2021, Paul Howard from the ManpowerGroup is going to give us a quick overview of that, and then we're going to move into answers and questions. So it is quite a jam-packed call, so do make sure that you're kind of tuned in for it. So here are a couple of things you might need to know. All attendees are automatically muted, so if you want to engage with us, you need to use the Q&A or the chat function. I do recommend that throughout the presentations you're using the Q&A so that you can get the most value, and I can pull out the most used questions and ask our speakers today to answer them. We will be emailing attendees the brochures and reports that are discussed in today's webinar, as well as the presentation. So if one of our speakers, including me, needs to skip through something, don't be afraid, you'll be able to get the data afterwards. The webinar will be recorded and will be available on demand to you all. And what we want you to do while you're listening to everything that's being said is to bring it down into your own organisation and think about what it means for you and your workplace, what we're discussing today. Okay, so to bring it down into some practical applications. So let's talk a little bit about D&I strategy. And from this point of view, I'm going to be looking at the business case. Okay, so why does diversity and inclusion matter? Besides the moral and the social reasons that most people are really connected to, the business case is really evident as well. So companies in the top quartile of ethnic and cultural diversity on executive teams, so that's your executive teams now, are 33% more likely to have industry leading profits. Okay. We also see those who don't have that are also less likely to be above the average profitability. So basically, it's not just about benefiting and earning more money, but actually those who don't have that are lagging behind. We also see from a report that Glassdoor did that 67% of job seekers said that they're looking for a diverse workforce when they're looking at jobs. We also know that inclusive companies are 1.7 times more likely to be innovative leaders in their market. And the Harvard Business Review found that diverse teams are able to solve problems faster than cognitively similar people. So that's something you really need to consider as you listen to what's being shared today. There's a direct link between workplace diversity and inclusion and decision-making, Researchers have found that when diverse teams made a business decision, they outperformed individual decision makers up to 87% of the time. So when you're just looking for one person to make a decision, rather than leveraging your team and the diversity that exists within it, you're less likely to make a good decision. Okay, and if that isn't enough, employees in highly diverse and inclusive organisations, and take a note, inclusive organisations, you might have a really good diversity policy within your organisation, but not be inclusive enough to leverage it. So they show 26% more team collaboration and 18% more team commitment than non-inclusive organisations. Think about all the interventions that you pay for to create more collaboration and team commitment. Inclusive organisations are able to increase by 26%. Teams that follow an inclusive process make decisions, and this was fascinating when I saw this one, 2 times faster with half the meetings. Imagine half the meetings that you're having to deal with over Zoom, right? And twice as fast. And then decisions made by diverse teams delivered 60% better results. So it's faster and produces better results. Inclusive companies are 3 times more likely to retain millennials for more than 5 years. We're having a massive issue with retention. We hear it all the time that millennials don't stay, but now we know that inclusive companies have a massive impact on that. And then according to a national study, those who experience discrimination at work were twice as likely as those who have not to report illness, injury or assault, and the impact of which on productivity, engagement, and overall workplace effectiveness is probably obvious to you, but that's worth considering, okay? So let's think about some of the challenges by recruiters for hiring in the process. For doing this piece, what I've thought about is what are the things that both research and practice have told us are more helpful to attracting and including diverse talent. So first is the language that you use. There is a predominant sense to use what they call masculine language, which is words like ambitious and dominant, and this will be less appealing to female applicants. There's also a preference for value and confidence over competence in the interview process. We also need to be aware of the double standard between men and women in an interview process. So there is a research that shows that we have an expectation of women to prove their experience versus men to be presumed as being capable. We also need to broaden where roles are advertised and applicants are sought from. So we need to think about where are we advertising these roles and where are we looking for applicants from? Are they predominantly privileged groups? There's also something about ensuring that applications do not have unconscious bias built in. Recent research has shown that AI actually can have unconscious bias built in because it's using previous hiring methods which were done by humans who had unconscious bias in the process. We know that changing the names from male to female or from westernized names or to westernized names have higher percentages of getting through an interview process. We also know that if you can look at the personal preferences of the people interviewing, you'll be able to negate some of the unconscious bias that's built into the interview process. There's also things like avoiding psychometric tests when you actually may benefit from neurodiverse people in the process. There's using less must-haves in the job description and more nice-to-haves, because we know that underrepresented groups and minorities are less likely to apply if they don't meet all of the must-haves. Have your recruitment process reviewed by a number of people in an effort to highlight biased language. So for instance, you may have a committee that is engaged with diversity and inclusion, reviewing to see what you may be missing in the hiring process. Use more flexible language. We know that flexi-time, part-time and job share written into job descriptions increases the diversity of applicants to the job. Advertise internal committees and supports as part of the package. So if you are active in certain types of diversity and inclusion practices, add that to the package because it tells those people that they're welcome. Now, this study, while it was done in America, it was also redone in the UK this year, and this still stands out. We know that whitened CVs are actually limit the amount of people that we put through the hiring process. So, for example, removing things that identify race or cultural cues actually increases the diversity of applicants by 25%. So from 10 to 25, 15% increase. So these are all very simple things you can think about in terms of what you're building in that creates bias or limitations to the applicants who apply to your organization or to the role that you're seeking, remembering the business benefits of having more diversity within your organization and how that has a direct impact on engagement, employee performance and retention, as well as the bottom line. So now I'm going to hand you over to Salat Chowdhury, the Chief Executive Officer for the Irish Centre to Diversity. So Salat, it's brilliant to have you with us. So I'm going to pop on to the next slide for you to kick us off.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you can hear me, yes?
Brilliant.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I'm going to crack on with, next slide, please. I'm going to crack on with this because we've only got a few short minutes, so there's quite a lot to go through. So what I'm going to try and give you is kind of the bigger picture of what's gone on over the last certainly 14 months or so, and what will continue to happen over the next 14 months as well. Now, the Irish Centre for Diversity, the National Centre for Diversity, has large networks of organisations that we work with, hundreds of thousands of people. And we do diagnostics within those organisations. So we've probably looked at the response of a million people in million employees over a 12-month period, a 12-year period. And so we get all this feedback. So this is based on the feedback that we get through our networks. So the things that your HR planning needs to take into account, certainly over the next couple of years or so, certainly in this year, is that the first one is, I'm going to be a little bit cryptic with this one, and just say that DEI is only half the picture. And I'm going to save that for you because I'm going to introduce you to a friend, and hopefully this friend will be your new best friend and help you understand how you can achieve your aspirations. Okay, so obviously we've had 14 months of COVID-19 pandemic. That's changed everything. It's changed us as people. It's changed the society. It's changed the workplace forever. The workplace will never ever be the same again, and we'll have to start looking at how we change as managers as well, managing people in this hybrid kind of arrangement. Now, just in terms of how it's changed us as people, around about 14 months or so, when this dreaded disease came to our shores, what we've had is the equivalent of the spectre of death and mayhem stalking around this 14-month period, the lives of people that we know, and taking away, in some cases, taking away the lives of people that we love. But it's also made us feel very vulnerable, and survival instincts have been absolutely to the fore in this 14-month period. But it's changed us as people. So when the COVID-19 first hit us, it forced us to stop. So it was akin to us being on a roundabout, round and round and round, and you saw life through these little snippets, snapshots, these pictures. It would register in your brain, but then you'd move on. But actually what has happened, it's caused people to think, actually, we want more from work, right? We want more from our own lives. It's caused us to reevaluate our families, how much time we want to spend at work, where we want to travel, how long we want to work. But also critically, it's made us reevaluate what we want from our colleagues, from our leaders, and from our managers. We want them to be supportive, empathetic. We want them to be considerate, compassionate. We want them to be caring about our personal objectives as much as they want us to be caring about the organisational objectives. They want people from certainly diverse backgrounds, want their managers, leaders to be educated, to be knowledgeable about their diversity, whether that diversity is from the lived experience of being a woman, a trans person, somebody who's neurodiverse, somebody from a Black and Asian or minority ethnic background. We want our managers and leaders to actually be knowledgeable about what it is that makes us unique, that makes us want to come to work, to be motivated, the barriers that are in our way. And that brings me nicely on to systemic inequality or institutional inequality, or even indeed structural inequality. And these phrases are often used, but roughly speaking, people mean the same thing when they're using it. The phrase institutional racism first came from America in 1969, and the phrase was coined by Stokely Carmichael, a Black rights activist, and it was then used some 20 years later in 1999 by William McPherson in relation to the Metropolitan Police. But essentially, what it means is that when Stokely Carmichael was talking about structural racism, he was talking about kind of society at a society level, and when McPherson was talking about it, he was talking about it certainly at an organisational level. But it is to me, it's definitely a fact that systemic inequality, systemic racism exists. Now, systemic inequality is a much wider system than just mere racism, and it includes things like systemic racism, systemic homophobia, systemic discrimination against a whole range of different people from different backgrounds, and actually some people are in denial about the whole thing about systemic inequality even existing. But I think that actually, absolutely, you can prove that it exists. And one of the things that you can do to really illustrate the fact that it does exist is just take the system. So if you take the year dot, it's now 2021, that's 2021 years, okay? In Ireland, for the first 1,990 years, so around about 1990, the system was finally developed, nurtured, tweaked, honed, protected, and it was primarily for one type of person, and that one type of person was the white, male, Christian, Catholic, heterosexual, able-bodied, non-disabled person, right? And it's only around about 1990 that women started getting into the workplace, and first of all wanted jobs, and then careers, and then aspired to management and leadership positions. And then you've got your influx of kind of migrant workers, people from outside, and then there was a realization actually that there were a lot of people out there that were neurodiverse, probably around about 15% of the population are neurodiverse, and then you've got your LGBTQ plus populations and your trans people, and actually one of the manifestations of how this works is that there was a friend of mine, and this friend of mine was an absolutely superb candidate to go for a job. It was a top job, chief executive post, and he'd gone for this job, and it was on the second day of Ramadan. Now, this gentleman was he's a practicing Muslim, so he's fasting, and it's the second day, and I'm a practicing Muslim as well, and I was fasting. And on that second day, the first 2-3 days, you're zonked out, right? You don't know where the world is. You wake up at all times, types of time in the morning. You try and drink water, which makes you go to the toilet, etc. And I was completely zonked out. So would he have been? Like, it was on the second day of Ramadan. That there was no way in the world that anybody was trying to be conscious, but the system just didn't recognize that somebody from a different religion, a different background, would have been applying for a job and being interviewed for a job at the absolutely the wrong time. So he was immediately at a disadvantage. Okay. Now, when we looked at the kind of systemic equality in terms of gender, what we've seen from the pandemic is that women have suffered the most. The biggest group to have suffered is women. Women have departed the labour force. They've had to still, in 2021, in our liberal society, are still the carers, primary carers of our children. So they've done the homeschooling, they've done the food, they've done the entertainment of the kids, and they've worked at the same time. So women have really had it difficult, and the kind of the pandemic has shown up the fault lines in these systems. So one of the things that organisations have to do going forward is actually start to identify what is it in your organisation that's holding people back. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Even our organisation's got it. We've got it as well. And as we identify these things, we then change things. I'll give you an example. So we had an award ceremony 2 or 3 weeks ago. And obviously I knew about welcoming people and not using the phrase ladies and gentlemen. But I didn't communicate that to the external speakers. And it was like ladies and gentlemen all night. Anyway, we had somebody that wrote back to us very kindly and said, listen, you know, I'm non-binary, right? And I felt a little bit excluded when there was all this use of the words, you know, ladies and gentlemen. So the first thing that we did is said, look, re-apologise. This will never happen again. From now on, we will change our systems and we will ensure that all external speakers have been told that they should be gender neutral. So every organisation has it. Yours will have it. Ours has it. Nothing to be ashamed of as long as you do something about it. Okay, so the other thing that's happened is that there's going to be a need for culture change. What we see now is that micro cultures are going on. So every time somebody's having some kind of a one-to-one, whether it's over the internet, in these kind of, we've got a microclimate that's going on here as well. So that's different. It might be different to the organisational culture. So the organisational culture that we all understood and nurtured and tried to change and develop for all these years, suddenly it's all changed. And now what you've got is a load of microcultures, which are much, much more difficult to control, much more difficult to understand, and much more volatile as well, because it involves sometimes one-to-one relationships. So that's changed, and that's something that kind of recruiters will need to take into account as well. Also, micro inequities, and I won't talk too much about that because I want to move on to some of the other things as well. The other key thing is that organisations will need to know what they don't know. Actually, just get out there and find out more about diversity. Doing half-a-day training every 2 years or one-day training every 2 years absolutely isn't going to cut it. There is so much. Our field is so complex now. There's so much diversity out there in terms of people and their backgrounds. It's really, really difficult to keep on top of it, even for somebody like me who works in it all day, you know, and the terminology changes every day. So it's really important to start to understand what is it that we don't know, and why don't we know it? And if we did know the answer to those questions, how will that change how we manage and how we hire and manage people and develop people? And also something called a lack of IIQ. Now, IIQ stands for Inclusivity Intelligence Quotient. And that's a bit like IQ, except it's about how it's a measure of how inclusive you are of all the different people that you come across, whether it's somebody from a different gender, whether it's somebody from a different racial background, whether it's somebody who's neurodiverse. It's all those things, how you deal with those things. Very different to emotional intelligence. You can be emotionally intelligent of people of your own type, but be completely unintelligent, I guess is the right word, unintelligent about people who don't share your kind of cultural background, etc. Okay, just moving on, please. I'm really rushing this because I know I've got a lot to talk about and very little time. So just as a little bit of interactive thing, right? So if I said to you all, with 4 being highest, how important is it to have a strategy in your organization? 4 being highest. Can you just put that in your comments box very, very quickly? I'm only going to spend about 10 seconds on this. Can you see any numbers, Sheila? I can't see anything at the moment. Oh, 2, right, 2s, yes. 2. Anybody else? 3, quick as you can. 4s, okay, 2, 3s and 4s, yeah, okay, keep going. Another 5 seconds. Okay, interesting. All right, so we'll just move on. So next one, next slide, please. Okay, the same, next slide, please, yeah. Yeah, so the next thing in terms of an inclusive workplace culture, 1 to 4, 4 being highest, how do you rate the importance of an inclusive workplace culture? Okay, 4, 4, another 5 seconds. Okay, we're going to move on to the next slide, please. Okay, institutional inequality, with 4 being highest, rate between 1 to 4. How important do you think it is for your organization to remove institutional inequality? Come on, guys, go for it. 3, 4, 4. Okay, 4. Okay, any more? Yes, 4. Okay, right. So there seems to be more consensus around 4 now. Good. That's good. Something's worked already. Okay, right. We'll move on to the next slide. Okay. So, if one is more important than the other, right? Which do you think it is? You just put the first letters. Is it strategy? S for strategy, I for institutional inequality, or culture? Which do you think is most important? Just put one letter. Culture, C. Strategy, okay. C, culture. I think that's an I. Yeah, C, interesting. Okay. Okay, excellent. So lots of stuff around culture. Okay, great. Thank you very much. We'll move on. Okay, so this slide has been changed because we didn't trust Cisco to deliver the video for us. So what I'm going to try and do is tell you a quick story. Okay, how long have we got left, Sheila?
Give you 3 minutes.
Oh my gosh. Do you know what? We're going to skip the story. We'll just crack on. We'll just crack on. Okay, just crack on. Okay, just crack on. Okay, so I did promise you the full picture. Okay, so when we talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion, that's only half the picture. I told you earlier on about the kind of the responses that we've analysed of probably 1 million employees over that 12-year period that we've been operating the diagnostics, and we created that first for insurance giants Aon. And what we've seen very clearly that all our research points to 6 pillars of inclusion. Okay, and they are more than just the kind of the 3 that were mentioned earlier on. So they are fairness, respect, equality, diversity, inclusion, and engagement. Freddie, hopefully your new best friend. Now, Freddie is critically important to inclusion. If you're not talking about these 6 component parts of inclusion, you're not really talking about inclusion. You're only talking about half the picture. So these are interdependent and interlocked. If one of these is missing, the whole thing's missing. So whether you're talking about inclusive recruitment, whether you're talking about inclusive nursing, inclusive policing, inclusive leadership, inclusive management, if you're not talking about Freddie, you're not really talking about the whole thing. You're talking about aspects of it. And that's really important to kind of remember. Next slide, please. Okay, next one. Okay, so just in terms of lots of people identify that the culture was the most important thing, and we absolutely agree with you on that, certainly. And the Irish Centre for Diversity has defined an inclusive workplace culture, or redefined it. So an inclusive workplace culture is the unseen force that determines the beliefs, attitudes, feelings, conduct, and behaviours of your employees. It is one in which the day-to-day emotional climate in your workplace settings and groups makes your employees feel, next slide please, that fairness for all is a reality, that respect for all is the norm, that equality of opportunity for all is embedded, where diverse employees feel that they belong, inclusion is widely understood, where all colleagues are committed to inclusive behaviours and will leaders connect the link between an inclusive culture and business performance? Critical of that knowledge piece and engagement, where there's an emotional attachment between colleagues, leaders, managers, the values and goals of the organisation. Now, when we did some informal research on Freddie, and we asked people to rate which one, rate one the most highest. Which one do you think rated highest after the 6 component parts of Freddie? Just write down in your chat buttons, which do you think came up top, that people rated the most high, that was most important to them? E, equality. Any more? Somebody said R and an F. Okay, any more? I. To read with my weak eyesight now. Okay, so actually it was respect. Respect trumped everything else. That's quite interesting, isn't it? Respect. And how people, I remember sitting down at the start of the pandemic, sat down at my desk for 16 hours and wrote about respect. And it's amazing where it all took me. But I realized that actually how you show respect, where it's shown, how it's documented, who it's shown in front of, actually determines the bottom line, what you earn at the end of the month or end of the week. It's quite amazing. Which one do you think came out at the bottom of the list? Just the first letter, yeah? People are struggling with that one. What's that? D? Yes, keep going. Yeah. D. D. Yeah. Okay. Engagement. Actually, it was diversity. Diversity is the holy grail, the thing that we're all searching for. Diversity within our organisations, and it came out at the bottom. There is a neuroscience explanation for all that, and which I haven't got time to go into. Maybe when we answer the questions later on, I'm going to that. Have I run out of time now, Sheila? Am I right?
You can take 2 more minutes to do a bit of a wrap up.
Okay. Yeah. Let's keep going then. Let's keep going. Okay, so when we look at Freddie, and we look at, right, so there are 7 emotional triggers of the human emotions for the limbic system, yeah? And now we put them under the heading ISFACs, and that stands for, and if you look at these words and they turn them around, they're better demonstrated. So if you look at the word inclusion or exclusion, okay, as soon as you hear the word exclusion, it's creating some kind of emotional trigger in your mind straight away, that word itself. Self. Now, in the research that we've done over the last 5 years, we've managed to identify an unconscious bias that nobody listed. There's about 188 unconscious bias listed, right? And they've missed the one that was hidden right in plain sight, and that's self, the lens of me or you or myself, and that includes any part of myself, my dog, my cat, my husband or wife, whatever. And actually, it's the lens through which we look at almost everything that we look at. All right, it's the reason why when COVID was happening in China, we didn't hardly pay any attention, but when it came to our shores, we watch the news every night for the first 6 weeks. The more that something's relevant and related to us, the more that we pay attention to it. And I guess that explains a little bit why diversity is at the bottom of the league in terms of Freddie. So fairness or unfairness, autonomy, lack of autonomy, micromanagement, sure way to get people out of the organisation. Certainty, we all know about that. Transcendence is us wanting to be more than a mere beast of burden in the workplace. It's having some purpose and moral purpose and something valuable that we do in the workplace, and obviously security. Now, if you look at ISFACs, if you look at Freddie, absolutely they cross-reference against each other, they cross-fertilize, and they're kind of inextricably linked. Next slide, please. I've probably got about a minute, I think. Okay, so DEI is only half the picture. Next slide, please. Okay, so what I'm not going to do is going to go into these slides because I don't want to take anybody else's time. And also, Sheila, you did some really good slides in terms of some of the business case. So I'm not going to repeat some of the stuff that you said there that have got some slightly differences, but people can have the presentation. With that, I'm just going to stop because I don't want to steal anybody else's time.
Thanks a million, Salat. I appreciate it. So I'm going to move us through the last bits of your slides, and everybody will have access to them. So they're going to be able to compare maybe some of the different pieces that we've presented. So thank you for that. So we have a poll question now, which Paul is going to launch for us, and we're just looking for everyone to engage in it. The question is, what is your organization's biggest diversity and inclusion challenge right now? And we've given 6 options. So if you can just use your polling tool, that would be great, and just submit your answers. Okay. just give everyone a chance to do that for a second. I don't want to take up too much time with it. Equally, if you're having any challenges with the Q&A, you can pop into the chat just like you did previously, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, if it's easier to interact that way. But it'd be great for us to have a sense of what's kind of your priority. Brilliant. So I'm seeing some 5 coming through, some 3s. So inclusive recruiting, inclusive leadership. Okay, so use the polling tool, or please do put your numbers in. 4, implementation. Yeah, that's a really important one. Some more of 3, the inclusive recruiting. Okay, so keep popping them into chat just to let us know what is really the biggest challenge you're facing right now within your organisation. Excellent. So we're going to move to the next piece, which is Peter Brabazon. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Specialisterne. And Peter, I'm going to hand it over to you now to talk us through your presentation.
Next slide. Thanks very much, Sheila. And thanks very much to Manpower for having us here today. So in a nutshell, we're Specialisterne, and we're about getting neurodiverse people into employment. That's simple. So I'd like to talk briefly to you about some of the lessons that we've learned and some of the good practices in there that we believe, and also obviously the benefits. But I think Sheila has really covered them well. Next slide, please. So Specialisterne Ireland is associated with the Specialisterne Foundation in Denmark. We're in about 10 countries in North, South America, Europe, and then in Australia. They will be the particularly strongest places. So in a nutshell, we started in 2013 with a loose association with Specialisterne Foundation, and we placed 4 candidates in work. Last year, we placed 82, and currently we placed over 400 of the 900 people that we've worked with, but the others would have got skills maybe by themselves to get work. Today, we're supporting actively 62 candidates in work, and we have about 32 partner companies, for example, in IT, finance, accounting, right across the board, indeed right out to PR. And that's often, a lot of neurodiverse people are assumed they cannot work in the front line, but there are jobs in PR companies at the back of the office as well. Next slide, please. So our logo is a dandelion. So a person of ability, we say our neurodiverse people are, in the wrong place, in other words, not supported by your company, are unemployed. They won't get in and they won't retain their job. But a person of ability, our neurodiverse people, if they are valued and nurtured along the lines Sile was talking about, then they'd be employed. And that's where we're coming from. Next slide, please. So what's the typical candidate that we're meeting? Of the first 500 we analysed, they were male. That's because females, unfortunately for them, are typically diagnosed over 10 years later than males in this area. Average age 24, which is strange. They have a 3rd level qualification. The lower one is, unfortunately, again, the females. The higher one is the male, the 80%. Typically in maths type subjects, though. That's an interesting thing. So the so-called STEM, subject science, technology, engineering, and maths. The average education level would be 7-8. That is a pass degree or an honours degree. We have, of course, a number of people with PhDs, and we have a number of people with 6 and actually lower as well. I just looked at that this morning. The main thing about them, they come to us unemployed at that age, maybe haven't been through 3rd level, and they're available for work. That's the key thing. And if they're not unemployed, the others are looking to improve the type of role that they've currently got. What we typically find is they're very loyal, and that's a big thing that we mentioned earlier on. So the churn is less often, very accurate, hardworking, and talented, and big thing here for Patrick, humorous. He's a great man for the terrible puns, and they're talented, working right across those spectrums. They're prepared for. Next slide, please. So, just the typical challenges are lack of understanding of social skills, challenges then gaining employment, and then challenges being in employment and retaining that job. They're the sort of 3 headings. If we go to the next slide, I'll expand on them. So, meeting accommodation those challenges. First of all, is the lack of understanding of social skills. And this applies to all neurodiverse people generally anyway. So some have poor eye contact, some don't understand humor or sarcasm, some are too literal. The great thing about this, that's a strength, of course, particularly say if you're in the computer world and you understand programming, it's very literal. It's either right or wrong, plus or minus. However, If you're told as a lady first thing in the morning on a Monday morning that did you have a tough weekend? You look very tired. Not a great thing, but you would get that often from some of the people that we work with, and we just have to prepare them a little bit for that. That's what we do. So also context blindness. They may say, well, it's probably the right thing, but they don't quite get the context. So again, it comes back to almost the same point. Reading facial expression, very interesting one. A lot, particularly the autistic group, would mix up happiness and anger. So you can imagine that. I've thrown this one in here. It's sort of a physical one, and that's stimming, so-called stimming. Stimming is where somebody needs to do something physical to relieve their stress. And in the past, a lot of people try to stop stimming, particularly in their children, and a lot of people therefore don't stim. But it's very good to have some sort of thing in your hand or something like that, or even to rock back and forward. And I know the chief executive of another well-known autistic group in Ireland, he skips when he's under pressure, so in his walking. So it's in terms of best practice in this area, the fundamental thing is to be clear. All communications should be clear, and particularly important in Ireland. Don't speak ambiguously. Well, I've lost the word. I'm autistic, as you can see. We have autism in our family, by the way. So, in a nutshell, that's the biggest single thing. Is if accommodation falls down, you know you have a problem with a neurodiverse person. Very important. Often, visual instructions and directions are very good. We've done an audit in a number of colleges, but one in particular, dreadful signage, just dreadful, even for a person. And that's an important point. If you fix something for a neurodiverse person, you're often fixing it for everybody. And also, sometimes with particular, like say with dyspraxia, executive time, the processing time, when you ask them a question, they may have the answer, may take them a little bit to come back. They have the intelligence, they probably give you the right answer, may take them a little time to process it. So executive functioning would be a big thing there. Next slide, please. So this is about really gaining employment. And employers have a role here too, and I've seen it particularly with leaders in this area. CV preparation and interview skills, and providing mock interviews. Even though you may not be going to take on the person necessarily, but if they've applied to you, I know some employers actually offer this anyway. That's a really useful thing to do, because what you look back at our candidates, typically they've come to us unemployed, and we ask ourselves, why are they unemployed? Well, actually, it's because they've never done any type of work, either in school or in college. In fact, they haven't got a good internship, often necessary to complete their qualification. And the big issue for them then is they don't have that experience. So they do need to do mock interviews in that, because it's very hard for them to tell their story in competency-based interviewing. Also, of course, the big thing that we would ask companies in best practice would be to reserve internships for neurodiverse people. This is not a problem. It's not illegal positive discrimination. We've gone through this several times, including with legal people. Hence, the state here in Ireland has a 6% target just coming in now for neurodiverse and people with disability in general. And some companies that we work with, for example, SAP, has a 1% target just for autism in their so-called Autism at Work program. If you would move on to the next one, Sheila, please. And so finally, keeping somebody, which is the big thing, obviously, there are often environmental sensory issues. And I'm going to illustrate some examples of that, but they're often easily accommodated. Anxiety can happen. If you imagine somebody who hasn't had a job and you've just taken them on for the first time, they have no experience of working in the local shop, the local public house or whatever, then they may be anxious. And one of the ways of fixing that, of course, is have a good buddy who understands their issues, and maybe somebody with an idea what disability is about. And then the other thing is, while a lot of neurodiverse people are nervous, please do invite them to the social things that you have. Social life, and that's part of that cultural thing that we just heard about, is very important. And eventually they may say yes. Let them say no, but eventually they may say yes. And that has been a fundamental for us. Can we move on then? And I'll get to the more practical stuff. These are I mentioned a legal body. So these are the samples of the easy fixes that they came to for employing somebody. So like rearranging the office furniture, one important one, adjusting or modifying tests. Assessment for initial employment is so important, and sometimes it's so irrelevant to some types of neurodiverse people. I know we could talk about that one forever, and I see Sheila nodding her head. But particularly important is to assist people in communications. In other words, say to them, it's okay to ask questions. That's one of our problems, is you have to get people to become part of the team. Often nowadays, particularly in the IT industry, they do stand-up meetings every morning if they're developing so-called agile or scrums, and getting them to take part in that is a great thing to do. And you do similar things. You might have town hall meetings or whatever in other organizations. So then if we move on, Sheila, to the next one, please. So I'm giving you 4 examples of 4 people who I know and love so well, and they are really, unfortunately, all male, but that's the way the stats work. Patrick is our number 1, of course, up there. He had a real problem just with the interview. He's a really clever guy. He tried to set up his own business. Unfortunately, there were lots of competitors. He didn't assess the competition. But when he did the interview with a techie, admittedly, and that's one thing we would advise on, is having somebody who'd understand you. It's just not the pure HR function. The hiring manager ideally should be in there. An autism-friendly interview. We advise people on how to do that. He got the job. He's one of the first 3 ever to be employed by SAP from us. The next person is Mark. Mark, a very interesting person, has a sort of legal background. Ultimately, we got him through just an experiential job in SAP, but he's really, really shy. And when he got confidence, he then went on to work for NAMA in Ireland, which really looks after bad debt. And everybody in Ireland is smiling here. You know what I mean? And ultimately, he got a permanent position there. And basically, we see him about once a year now when he wants to talk about things. He's actually just made a presentation to the Central Bank of Ireland about neurodiversity. Then we have my Nick, who has a sensory issue like the next guy as well. And the sensory issue for him is clothing. But the problem was he was wearing bright blue clothing. You'll see he's back in it. And bright orange shorts and runners. All they asked for him, that was SAP, to take him from Microsoft, was he would go and wear just black. And actually, I thought it was a bit unfair, because the person interviewing him was in a pair of jeans. So I just actually don't get that. But we sort of mentioned it to him. But Nick has now got his own house and is living near SAP, and he doesn't have to take public transport, which he hates. He can't cope with it. But he's a really lovely guy. Great guy to go out for a drink with, by the way. Anyway, on to our last man, who is a really nice man. He came unemployed from Roscrea, pretty low qualifications, but his social skills were actually brilliant, he's quite autistic. Were brilliant. He ran the football club for a while in Dublin, but then he was headhunted, became a manager, and he's headhunted to Canada. And that's Stephen, a really nice guy. If I could have the next slide, please. So I mentioned employers, examples of partnerships. SAP, we've supplied, I suppose, nearly 30 people to them now, and about 12, 13 maybe are permanent in SAP. The others have gone on to various other careers. And ultimately what they did was, having worked with us for a while, and also for a group in India, they decided that they would do this globally. So they have the global target now of the 1%, which I mentioned. They're the big guys, and the big guys can often do this. But interesting enough, there's Open App there, the third one across. And Open App have only 50 people developing medical registries, computer type medical registries. And they have today, I think it's 6%, that is 3 of their workers are from us or others. And they're really great company. And they've had higher ratio. They've gone to 10% for a while as well. People move on sometimes as well. The other partners that I've mentioned, just colleges are very important for us, because that's where we found that they had got the education from those colleges, but they hadn't been prepared for work. And yes, colleges do a lot of good work, but we complement those. We put in the extra effort for those who are neurodiverse. And obviously other charities, our key line is we partner with everybody, and we don't want to have competitors. That's the key thing. So I just put in some of them, but we have memorandums of understandings with lots of different groups, for example, with dyspraxia. Could we move to the last one, please? So the benefits of employing neurodiverse people. Well, I think we've got a lot of that already from Sheila. So the top ones really are what we would be talking about and what we think. But really, it's engaging for staff. And if you have the right culture, then you'll probably have it really goes well. However, I would say it's good to have a strategy here. That's my background as well in business, as well as being an electrical engineer. Strategy will mean you won't have to learn too many lessons the hard way. But do start off, any company that's listening, do start off by just taking one person. Everybody's different. Don't try and turn your whole company into a neurodiverse friendly place. You'll get yourselves. And finally then, stealing from Accenture 2018 report, and yes, they've all the ones that Sheila mentioned, but ultimately they said right at the start, actually, the board, major financial rewards are up for grabs. And that's why wouldn't you do it? And my last slide, if you don't mind, that's the thank you one. Thank you very much indeed for listening to me. You'll see what Liam Ryan, the Managing Director of Ireland, said from SAP. Basically, people with autism are technically minded and think in a structured way, and there's absolutely no reason they shouldn't be able to do the job. So they do the job as well. That's the important bit. This is a talent pipeline. And of course, Nick, who I showed earlier on, he's very happy with himself. Why wouldn't he be? He's just got a dog. It's his own house. Thanks very much for your time. And we've big targets, obviously, there to help neurodiverse people in that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's really interesting building on from Salat's piece as well, and maybe laser focusing on a talent pipeline that isn't being tapped into as overtly as it could be, but is being developed at an educational level. So I really appreciate that. So what I'm going to ask for everyone to do now is that either use the Q&A or the chat function to pop in some questions. I'm going to skip a couple of slides due to time and move us into the piece. Paul was going to speak a little bit about an employment outlook survey, but you will actually get this in the notes, so I'm not going to call Paul to the table. So while you're popping your questions together, this slide can be really helpful for all of you to think about. How do you integrate the knowledge that Peter and Salat has just offered you in this presentation into making decisions within your organization? Because that's what this is all about at the end of the day, which is how do you use this in the reality of your organization? So there's a couple of questions that you will get in the slide to consider as well. Now, what I'm going to do is, there was one question that came in, so I'm going to ask possibly the same question both to Salat and Peter, but I might start with Salat to open it from your perspective, Salat. The question was about how do you bridge the gap between the DEI policies and the actual practices and reality of working in an organisation. Is there anything in particular that you think is a good place to start with that conversation, Salat?
Right, yeah. So the thing that we notice about policies is that all too often they kind of sit in the drawer somewhere, gathering dust until somebody gets into trouble. Okay, that's the first thing. And they're usually static documents, and they're usually kind of documents that just that guide you without really bringing things to life. They're not a call to action. One of the things that we've been doing actively certainly over a decade is trying to get people to create policies which act as a call to action, which inspire people, you know, and which set the tone for the organisation, the cultural tone. You know, the policy of this organisation is that we expect all our people to behave in an inclusive way, to be understanding of diversity, to be tolerant, to be respectful of all the people that work within the structures of our organisation. So it becomes much more of a call to action rather than just a flat document we just pull out when we need to.
And I love that, Salat. It's true, you know, they do get filed away and they usually get pulled out when we're in trouble or reinventing them or some kind of change is happening and we need to add the right words. So I think that's a very realistic representation. So Peter, from your perspective, how do you think we can integrate some of these kind of policies into the practices of what we do?
Well, I think it's great if you've done a strategy. The thing is, actually, the last part of a strategy is not supposed to be non-operational, is you should develop that spreadsheet, let's call it, assign responsibilities and target dates for doing things. Ultimately, though, what you want to do is really a marketing program as well. And that is, the marketing is not selling. So yes, you do need to do awareness. Yes, you need to supply information, and this is where you may need to get outside people like Sile group in about what is happening. But then, if you create the demand, and often there are flag bearers within the company who have neurodiversity either in themselves or in their family, they will want to do something around this. And that's, you put a committee together, or a panel, whatever you want to desperate word, put committee together to actually implement. And the big thing is suck it and see, try it with a few things. There's nothing like learning piloting. Most companies can afford to do piloting. If you're a large company in particular, you can afford to do some pilot and give the person 3 to 6 months internship with the possibility of retaining them. Maybe you could retain them up to 3 years or 4 years in Ireland, I think, without actually finally signing them on. Preferably, though, our target would be for long-term employment, of course.
Brilliant, Peter. So I really like that idea of the kind of action research piece, but it also links back to what Sile pointed out, which is that one of the biggest bias we have is self. So if you can engage people with things that they care about and have them engaging in those committees within the organisation, it can create more care. The burden doesn't have to always land on the visibly, different people. Yeah, so that's a really great piece. So we have another question. Where to start? So I think this might be towards Sile. Where to start if D&I isn't embedded in the organisation yet? So we're at the embedding position. Where do you think we should start with that, Sile?
Certainly leadership. Right. So this is interesting. The other thing that I didn't mention in the presentation that I'll have the opportunity to mention now is that in all of my lifetime, so I worked from the age of 10, right, in my mum's shop, right. So the stereotypical Asian shopkeeper's son, but the unstereotypical thing was my mum ran the shop, Asian businesswoman. And in all of my time, so I've been on this for 54 years. So 44 years of that has shown me that culture change happens from the top, except for 2020. Okay, so what we've seen for the very first time is culture change happening from the bottom. So particularly after George Floyd. So what was happening in all sectors, whether it's colleges, it's business, in charities, smaller organizations, larger organizations, people of color, Black and Asian particularly, started to ask through the employee resource groups, the affinity groups, associations, through unions. They started to ask questions about what is the organization doing around systemic racism. What is it doing in terms of the response to BLM? So what that has done is forced this. It's like a movement that's cascaded from bottom to top, and it's gone right up to the top leaders. The top leaders started to feel a little bit uncomfortable about the whole thing because, number one, they didn't really get it for all these years. They still don't get it, but they're trying more to get it. But what it's also forces them is to actually start to listen, to have a conversation. So many times we've heard of organizations having an internal conversation about the whole kind of Black and Asian experience within the organization. So that's definitely created some kind of impetus for change, from bottom to top, as opposed to culture change always happening at the top. Still, even with that said, culture change is certainly, the leaders have the hands on the steering wheel, the accelerator and the brake. So they still control the pace of change within organizations. If we want to create culture change and embed equality, Freddie, within an organization, we've got to win the hearts and the minds of the leaders. Okay, that's still a job to be done. Still, so many of them don't understand the pressing need, the demand that's been absolutely intensified, magnified over the last 14 months from people from diverse backgrounds. And by the way, that's probably most of us, right? If you look at all the different protected grounds, gender, race, sexual orientation, marital status, there's probably at least 5 of those that we all share anyway. So it's probably almost all of us. If you look at the way that discrimination against young people occurs, you're twice as likely to be discriminated at the age of 16 and 25 than you are in other age groups. When you turn 44, turn 45, you're 6 times more likely to be discriminated against than when you were at 44. It's worse for women. It's 40. Age discrimination kicks in at 40. So by the way, it's about all of us. Diversity includes us all, right? It's something that we've been saying ever since the very beginning. Diversity includes us all. So what we've got to do is try and win the hearts and minds of these leaders, get them to understand that actually it's more than just a business case. The business case is clear, and yet still they don't buy into it. Some of them don't buy into it. The moral case, well, it's always been there. They understand it, and the legal case is something that they think that they should home in on. But actually, there's a fourth case, all right, and that's a biological case. So if you look at inclusion is one of those survival instincts, right? So think of a time when you didn't feel included, when everybody went to the office party and you weren't invited. How did it make you feel? Ultimately, if that happens 4, 5, 6 times, it's going to start making you unwell. Okay, you feel isolated, vulnerable, right? And your emotions start to become aroused. Your ability to think rationally starts to go down, right? Until you're able to rationalize it and work out why this is happening. But so not only is inclusion important from a business, moral, legal perspective, from a biological perspective, it's an imperative. We need to feel included to survive, because together with lots of different people, 30 of us can defeat saber-toothed tiger. Us on our own are very vulnerable and probably are going to be eaten alive. Does that kind of answer the question? It's a very long answer, sorry.
That's brilliant, Sile. So what I'm pulling out of that is a call to action, that if you're trying to influence embedding D&I, and you're also trying to influence leadership, what you need to start thinking about is those 4 things. They all have a part to play. And that biological piece often gets overlooked. There's a really good reason we exclude people, but there's also a really good reason to include people and to develop those skills. So I'm going to finish with one question to Peter, which is, Peter, what call to action would you have for anybody on the call directly related to your work? What would be the call to action you'd like to leave everybody with?
Decide to do it. I know that's not very strategic, but whether you have a D&I strategy or not, try it. You probably know somebody who you could give a helping hand to. Not going to cost you a lot of money. It's probably going to be done through an internship. I mentioned I've got 2 sons who are neurodiverse. One of them is starting in a warehouse, and the other is starting in a well-known consulting company. Different skills, different qualifications. The pharmaceutical company, he'll be the first person he'll ever taken on, and the consulting company will be the second person after 6 or 8 years. We gave them a phenomenal person, but only now have they got a worldwide mandate to do it, and the Irish are off and running because they knew that it would work. One of the things you could do, and it's hard, there is a bit of cost around this. Managers are afraid to take on somebody who they perceived as risk around. So what some companies, what they've done is they've created maybe a budget that's associated with the chief executive leadership that would be separate. If you take that person on but then after 6 months, if you really like that person, it'd be on your budget. Simple thing to do. And it would be really actually leadership from the top as well. I know that's how SAP started off here in Ireland anyway.
Thanks, Peter. I think that's really important. There is something about getting started and setting up pathways to figure it out. So, and there is a good bit of action learning in it. So thank you both. I'm going to just gently pop this wrap up on the screen while I thank you both for everything. We know that we'll be sending the slides that we've done today, but also material from both of you about the work that you do and the supports that you can offer, as well as some of the supports that the Manpower Group are offering in relation to diversity and inclusion in the workplace and recruiting practices. So thank you very much, both of you, for being here. It was great to actually connect with you in person, and hopefully we all cross paths again in a better position with better stats behind us as well, hopefully. And thank you everyone for joining us as participants, for engaging in the chat, and for staying with us. You will get the recording and also these slides to be able to follow up with everybody afterwards. So thank you very much. Have a lovely day. Enjoy your lunch.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, Sheila.
Thank you.